Digital Devil Saga was one of the most unique games in the entire Megami Tensei franchise. In case you need a reminder, the game was initially released back in July of 2004 and was meant to broaden the appeal of the franchise. The game would take on a more traditional JRPG approach, but still had the gameplay mechanics and thematic elements that fans have come to expect, while also offering brand new ideas to help distinguish it from other entries. Even though the execution wasn't perfect, to this day, Digital Devil Saga remains a fan favorite. I also spoke highly of the game myself in the video I made somewhat recently. However, something that I've noticed is that there isn't much discussion surrounding this game's direct sequel. This has always struck me as odd, since the first game is still highly regarded to this day, and you'd think that this enthusiasm would bleed over to DDS too. That's not to say that the game isn't acknowledged by the community, but if we were to just compare the popularity of these two titles, then it isn't even a competition. So for today's video, we're going to be shining a spotlight on this game, not just to give it more exposure, but so that we can also determine whether or not it lives up to the expectations set by its predecessor. But before we get started, there are a few things that I want to mention. Digital Devil Saga 2 is a sequel in its purest form. It assumes you've experienced the previous title, and wastes little time reintroducing us to the characters. For the sake of keeping things brief, I'm going to be doing the same. It should also go without saying that there are going to be spoilers for Digital Devil Saga 2 throughout this video, both for story and gameplay. Due to the way the game structures its content around the narrative, it's almost impossible to show footage beyond the first act without it being classified as a spoiler. So if you have any interest in going through DDS 2, then I suggest you click off the video now and play the game yourself before watching this video. With all of that said and done, let's get started. To give a brief reminder, at the end of the last game, Surf and the other members of the Embryon confronted this mysterious woman named Jenna Angel at the top of the Karma Tower. During the battle, Surf accidentally destroys Angel's device and the junkyard simulation is destroyed, with the group getting separated through the ensuing chaos. The world beyond the Embryon's home is nothing like the utopia they imagined. They are instead greeted by a destroyed and desolate modern city. The streets are littered with petrified humans who are all turned to stone by this mysterious black sun. It isn't too long after entering the real world where Surf, Argela, and Gale reunite and are introduced to this young boy named Fred, where they're given a rundown on the situation. The world of Digital Devil Saga 2 can be divided up into two distinct factions. Aside from the regular civilians, there's the organization known as the Karma Society, and the resistance group called the Lokapala. The Karma Society acts as the game's central antagonists. Not only are they responsible for the junkyard simulation, but they're the ones who created the demon virus, in an attempt to counteract the effects of the Black Sun. But as we all know, the side effect that comes with the Atma avatars is insatiable hunger. The Karma Society has been hunting down the remaining humans to keep themselves sane, and anyone who acts against the society will become their next meal. The Lokapala is comprised of members who are against the views of the Karma Society, and are working to find a way to protect the last remaining people of the world. This group is led by Roland, a depressed middle-aged man who tries to drown out his inner despair through alcohol. During their first meeting with Roland, the Embryon learn that Sarah is currently being held by the Karma Society. Roland requests the group to break into their tower and deliver her to the Lokapala, using the currently captured Cielo as a bargaining chip. With no other options, the Embryon reluctantly agrees to these terms, since ensuring the safety of their comrades is their top priority. That's the basic setup to Digital Devil Saga 2, and much like the first game, it's rather simplistic. There's a goal established right off the bat, and most of the journey is spent working towards that goal. However, unlike the first game, DDS2's narrative feels like it's constantly evolving. An issue I had with DDS1 is that the game felt like it was spinning its wheels for most of the runtime. While there were some good character moments and the world was thematically interesting, the narrative was more focused on planting seeds for this game rather than being the most compelling standalone story. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it was bad or anything, it just takes a bit too long for things to get interesting. I know that this was done intentionally due to the two-parter nature of this narrative, but I've already gone into detail as to why I'm not a fan of how it was handled. On the plus side, however, this means that Digital Devil Saga 2 is filled to the brim with payoffs, and as much as I want to discuss the execution of those now, I believe that we should cover what exactly is changed gameplay-wise. In terms of core combat, the mechanics of Digital Devil Saga 2 are nearly identical to the first game. Battles are once again using the now famous press turn system, and you're still limited to only having 3 active party members at a time. Combo skills have also made a return. These were special moves that required you to spend multiple press turn icons to activate, assuming you had the proper skills equipped, of course. These skills range from moves you'd eventually be able to unlock through mantra to exclusive attacks that could only be performed with teammates. While most of these skills are the same as previously, there are a handful of new abilities that were introduced, with my personal favorite being the skill charge. It's like luster candy from later SMT games where it applies every kind of buff to your party. However, I would argue that it's a bit more balanced here, since you need to not only have the proper skills for your party, but also spend 2 press turn icons to use it. Some old combinations have also had their requirements tweaked so the skill would become less situational. That's good and all, but at the end of the day, I don't rely on combo attacks that much unless it's for the aforementioned charge skill. As I said, the in-the-moment combat is largely the same. Where things start to differ greatly, however, is in the character customization. There are 2 sides to party member customization. There's the returning mantra system, and a brand new layer of customization in the form of karma rings. Karma rings act as your equipment throughout the game. Not only do rings add extra stats to your party members, but a good handful of them come with some bonus effects. These range from negation or reflection of specific elements, automatically applying buffs and debuffs to a party member at the start of a battle, or just exponentially increasing a specific stat. Rings are acquired throughout your journey, either by purchasing them in shops, by finding them in chests, or by completing optional content. Individual rings can be customized to push your stats even further through the use of gems. The number of gems you can use varies between rings, and cannot be removed without destroying the gems. This means you need to commit to what gems you end up using, since they're a one and done sort of deal. Karma rings are a great idea. They can be used to not only add a new layer of strategy to battles, but also modify the roles of the party members. Cielo is a character whose highest stat is his agility. Through karma rings, you can either double down on his agility stat, or you can make up in areas where you might be lacking in, such as his vitality. The most interesting rings are the ones that you get near the end of the game, since they allow you to manipulate the press turn system in ways that you could only dream to do in other titles. Through creative use of the pass and change ring, it's possible to give all of your turns to one party member without consequence. The dual ring allows one party member to attack twice in a row. The synchro ring is perfect for combo skills since it reduces the turn cost to 1 icon. And finally, the turn ring bumps your press turn icons from 3 to 4 turns per round. The only drawback of these rings is that they provide next to no benefit to your stats and have very few gem slots for you to use. However, this never bothered me because more combat options are way more interesting to play around with than getting a few stat bonuses. The karma ring system is an idea I'd like to see come back in some form. While later SMT games do offer some depth through equipment, mainly to change the resistances of the protagonist, it's never been as interesting as it was here. Rings allow you to completely change up your playstyle in a way that hasn't really been done since, and I think that this goes a long way in allowing the players to express themselves in unique ways. The other side of the character customization coin is the returning mantra system. To give a reminder, your party members have fully customizable skill sets that can be changed through the pause menu. To unlock new skills for any given party member, you need to level up mantra. At the end of every battle, not only do you earn experience points, but you also earn Atma points that go towards your currently equipped mantra. Once you earn enough AP to max out the experience bar, you'll learn every skill associated with that mantra. Normally, the amount of AP you get from fights is pitiful. However, it's possible to gain large amounts of AP by devouring your enemies. Hunt skills are an alternate form of physical attacks that don't do much damage on their own, but if you manage to lower the enemy's health to the point where they can be killed by a hunt skill, you'll be rewarded with a large quantity of AP. This is the best way to level up mantra, so you're encouraged to devour as many enemies as possible. This is all very familiar stuff if you played the first game. Where things start to differ, however, isn't so much in how you level up mantra, rather it's through their acquisition. DDS1 presented the system through the mantra tree. Mantra were divided up into distinct paths that would occasionally branch out into different skills. For example, if you want to learn spells that can prevent and inflict status ailments, you need to start off by learning healing magic. Some mantra could also only be obtained after you mastered their connecting branches. This is usually reserved for late game skills such as debilitate and salvation. However, there are a few times where essential skills are locked behind mastering multiple mantra. Dakaja and Dakunda immediately come to mind, along with Midiarahan. While this setup got the job done, the execution wasn't perfect by any stretch. The game encouraged the player to have a wide variety of skills for their party, so that you can change any character's role to fit the situation. The issue is that it takes an absurd amount of AP farming to get to the point where you would have a healthy selection of skills. You can't just go from learning tier 3 ice magic to another tier 3 spell since you need to learn all of the prior spells beforehand, even if you have no intention of using them. Some mantra also just take forever to master, which adds to the time spent grinding. The core idea behind the mantra system is good, but the execution was just a bit sloppy. Digital Devil Saga 2 drops the mantra tree setup, and instead presents this system in the form of a grid. Every time you master a mantra, you unlock the ability to purchase any of the adjacent mantra. At first, this grid starts rather small, but it expands whenever you master one of the mantra located on the furthest edge. Something that you'll notice early on is these special glowing nodes. These are classified as esoteric mantra and are unlocked by mastering all of the surrounding nodes. Something to note is that this can be done across all characters. If one party member fills out half of the nodes and another fills out the rest, the esoteric mantra will be unlocked for all characters. It's just only purchasable by characters that have mastered any of the adjacent nodes. Sometimes unlocking a special node will result in a party-wide stat boost rather than an esoteric mantra. The mantra grid might seem a bit overwhelming to someone unfamiliar with DDS2, but it's actually a lot more simplistic than it sounds, and the game does a good job at easing you into it. While this system isn't as straightforward as the one from the first game, I find it to be a massive improvement for a few reasons. Because of the way the mantra grid is set up, it's very easy to quickly jump from learning skills of one archetype to another. All you need to do is make sure you master any of the adjacent mantra and you're golden. You can go from learning tier 2 electric magic to some powerful healing spells because those two mantra are right next to each other on the grid. There's no longer a need to start from scratch when you want to switch up what you're learning, meaning you can cut down on busy work if you can figure out an efficient path to your goal. Sometimes you want to learn lower level mantra because they come with some good passive skills, or would be generally a more cost-effective way of getting to the skill you want, but it's now up to the player to decide that instead of the game. The grinding issues I have with the first DDS have also been somewhat mitigated here. Some of the hunt skills were organized a bit differently this time around, making it far easier to get some of the essential skills. Iron Stomach and Atma Bonus are now some of the earliest hunt skills you can acquire, with AP Divide being obtainable shortly after. On top of this, Atma Premium is a new skill that was introduced that increases the amount of AP earned in battle even more so than Atma Bonus. If you have both of these passive skills on a character and they devour an enemy, you can master a mantra in next to no time, depending on the location. Grinding money for mantra was also made much easier thanks to the Rich Ring, which increases the amount of money earned after a battle. Because of the changes made to the mantra system, it's far easier and quicker to build up an arsenal of skills. It's more than possible to gain access to incredibly useful skills just by making sure you devour enemies every once in a while. However, I will admit that there were a few points where I dedicated some time towards mantra grinding. Not for nearly as long or as frequent as the first game, mind you, but I did feel a bit compelled to make the most out of areas filled with easy enemies whenever I had cash burning a hole in my pocket. And if you plan on doing any of the game's optional content, then I suggest you do the same. Just like with DDS1, there are a few extra bosses you can challenge if you have the proper point in the game and feel confident in your skills. There's the 4 Archangels, Vishnu, Shiva, Set, a superpowered Jack Frost, and finally the secret boss against Satan. Something interesting to note is that Satan can only be challenged when playing the game on hard mode after you've defeated all of the other optional bosses. He's easily the most difficult encounter in the game, and just like Demi-Fiend, you're going to need fully maxed out stats to even stand a chance. I haven't attempted this fight yet, but it's something that I plan on streaming at some point because it's become a little tradition of mine. Aside from Satan, who you most likely fight for bragging rights anyways, you're rewarded for defeating the optional bosses. You unlock new mantra, earn new karma rings, and even acquire some of the most powerful bullets in the game. It's a nice incentive for going the extra mile, even if the encounters themselves aren't that difficult. Actually, as a whole, DDS2 isn't a very challenging game when I really think about it. I want to preface this by saying that I played through the game on hard mode for this video. Normally, hard mode is unlocked after you finish one run of the game. However, if you have a completed save file for DDS1 on your memory card, then you can start the game immediately on hard if you wish. I highly recommend you do that, especially if you ended up completing the optional content in the first game, since you gain extra bonuses depending on what you accomplished. Most of these are some exclusive karma rings that come with some rather useful bonus effects, such as being able to repel Hama and Mudo skills, increasing all of your stats by 10, and giving you resistance to almighty damage. You also start off with extra stats depending on how many mantra you mastered in the previous game. These rewards are nice to have, but in all honesty, you don't even really need them. DDS2 gives you all of the tools you need to succeed and then some. Most of the challenge comes from learning what the game expects out of you. Once you have proper knowledge of the mechanics and know how to apply them in any given situation, it's pretty easy to just blast through most encounters. Just like with the first game, I recommend you max out your magic stat as soon as possible. Not only does this increase your defense against magic attacks, but your spells end up doing an absurd amount of damage when you're maxed out. Some bosses can even go down within a few turns with the right skill setup, so if you want to have an easier time, go with a magic build. Also, if you plan on using Ardula and Roland on your team, for the love of God, get the Mutual Karma skill for Gale and Cielo. At a certain point in the story, both Roland and Ardula will leave the party at the same time since they end up sacrificing themselves to kill a demon, and they only return to the party during the final act of the game. So either don't use those characters, or make sure you're prepared for when that happens, otherwise you'll be stuck with painfully underleveled party members for a long period of time. And finally, there's the Impel Stone. If you've seen my video on SMT Nocturne, then you know that I'm not exactly a huge fan of the skill Beast Eye. I find it to be a cheap way to add challenge to a fight, since it does nothing but give the enemies extra turns for free. DDS2, shockingly enough, gives us a taste of this power thanks to the Impel Stone. By using it in battle, you're able to give yourself 4 blinking press turn icons, which is an insanely powerful tool for clutching fights. If you have a good setup and know how to dish out massive damage, throwing down the Impel Stone and destroying bosses with the turns it gives you is such a satisfying feeling. The drawback is that it costs about $50,000 to purchase an Impel Stone from a Pyro Jack, and you can only hold on to one of them at a time. But by the end of the game, that's a small price to pay for 4 extra turns. If you have the Rich Ring equipped, you can earn so much money from random encounters that you can easily afford an Impel Stone whenever you need it. This item is unbalanced, and I completely understand why it never came back after this game, but man does it feel good to finally give bosses a taste of their own medicine. With all of this considered, it isn't hard to see that DDS2 is a lot less difficult than the first game. Challenge is a very tricky topic to discuss since it's entirely boiled down to player skill and experience. What I might find easy, someone else might find challenging, and vice versa. But for what it's worth, I don't think that DDS2's more comfortable difficulty hinders the experience that much. It's one of the easier games from the PS2 era, but it's far from being brain dead. There's still thought that needs to go into which skills you give your party members, and you need to carefully consider the karma rings you decide to equip. There's just a lot of wiggle room in case you don't have the perfect setup for your party. I've personally never played the game on normal mode, so I'm not sure how large the difficulty gap is, but from my experience, DDS2 is best played on hard mode. Before we wrap up the gameplay discussion, let's quickly go over the world and dungeon design. Just like with the previous game, DDS2 has a very strong atmosphere. Locations are a lot more contemporary this time around. Rather than invading the militaristic fortresses of the warring factions, dungeons instead take place in more grounded settings. You venture through office buildings, and airports, and factories. Occasionally, the game does present more unique areas, such as the Karma Society's research facility and the underground city, which is humanity's last habitable location since they're protected from the sun's deadly rays. Despite those two outliers, the world of DDS2 has a sense of gritty realism to it. The few times we get to venture to the surface, we're greeted by the petrified statues of humans unlucky enough to get caught out in the sun. It acts as a grim reminder of God's punishment to mankind for their sins. In terms of the actual level design, things are a bit more interesting than in the first game. While the early areas of the game are simple enough, later on, some light puzzle elements are introduced to shake things up a bit. The power plant dungeon requires you to activate terminals in order to progress. However, some of the terminals will cause doors to block your path, meaning you'll need to plan out your route ahead of time. During the revisit to the Karma Society research facility, you'll need to solve some simple teleportation maze puzzles to progress. It's nothing taxing, and mostly exists to add some spice to the exploration, but part of me feels as though the ideas presented weren't fully taken advantage of. By the time the puzzles start to get interesting, you're already at the end of the dungeon, and since the game is mostly one and done with its gimmicks, I was left wanting more on that front. If dungeons had one last room that pushed their gameplay ideas to their limits, then they would be a lot more satisfying to complete and more memorable as a result. With the way things are now, the dungeons just sort of limp towards the finish line, which is a shame since I like the exploration in these games. The only dungeon that doesn't suffer from this is the final one, but to run the risk of immediately contradicting myself, this dungeon goes on for far too long. The final act of the game takes place entirely on the surface of the sun. It's treated as this mega dungeon where you refight bosses featured in the original DDS, along with a few brand new ones. It's got got a bit of a celebratory feel to it and brings the duology full circle. The issue is that there isn't enough gameplay variety here to justify its length, and it visually gets tiring after a while. Trust me, this dungeon is going to make you hate the color purple by the time you're done with it. As a whole, DDS2 offers more of the compelling gameplay featured from the first game, but with enough tweaks and added features to make it an overall better experience. The best parts of DDS1's mechanics were brought over, and the more annoying design aspects were reinvented to be much more interesting. The mantra grid system is a natural evolution of the mantra tree from the first game. This new system immensely cuts down on needless busy work, and even rewards you for mastering as many mantra as possible. The karma rings add a new layer of customization that wasn't present previously. Not only are you able to tailor character stats to your liking, but some rings even allow you to completely change up your playstyle to add even more player expression to the combat system. Sure, DDS2 is a lot easier than the first one because of these additions, but I find the combat to be more fun as a whole. Gameplay improvements are one thing, but how does DDS2 stack up in terms of narrative? The first game spent a lot of its runtime planting seeds and presenting us with interesting mysteries. So, does DDS2 do a good job at answering those questions and providing us some satisfying payoffs? Well, there's only one way to find out. At the start of the game, the main goal is for our characters to locate Sarah and secure her for the rebellion group named the Lokapala. Our initial party is Surf, Gale, and Argila, though not too long into the journey, we're reunited with Cielo. Much to the group's surprise, Roland also ends up joining the party, infecting himself with a demon virus in order to stand a chance against the Karma Society. These 5 characters are the main party members that you'll be using throughout most of the game, and in case you're wondering what happened to Heat, this question is answered a few hours in. During the mission to rescue Sarah, it's revealed that Heat has joined forces with the Karma Society. He's mainly doing this to protect Sarah, but he was also swayed to their side upon hearing the truth of his origins. At the same time as all this, we're introduced to the leader of the Karma Society, Margot Cuvier, and we're given a better glimpse as to what this organization stands for. As I mentioned at the start of the video, the Karma Society is the ones responsible for the creation of the demon virus. The Junkyard Simulation, also known as the Asura Project, was created to perfect the virus, since the people with Atma avatars are seemingly immune to the sun's deadly rays. Though, as we're already aware, this comes with quite a few side effects. However, Cuvier has already taken this into consideration. It's established in the first game that Sarah can use her voice to calm tuners that have gone berserk. The Karma Society plans on taking advantage of this to stay sane. They have also hatched a scheme to use those they deem unworthy of joining the Karma Society as a source of food, capturing and sending civilians to a food processing plant to be prepared as their next meal. Something surprising about the narrative of Digital Devil Saga 2 is that it manages to incorporate the law and chaos discussion the mainline series is known for into the plot. The world is slowly deteriorating because of God, and Cuvier wishes to protect mankind from extinction. Cuvier believes that the Karma Society is the last bastion of hope for humanity, but the city walls can only hold so many people. Those that Cuvier believes are worthy will be granted Atma avatars and immunity to the sun, but the sinners will be purged and act as meals for humanity. It's easy to see how the Karma Society fits into the law representation. You're trading away your free will and possibly betraying your personal beliefs to guarantee yourself some form of safety in this chaotic world. Your individuality doesn't matter, and you exist mostly just to be another cog in the machine. We can even see some sort of hierarchy in place within the Karma Society. Low-ranking members consist of nothing but faceless goons, but the further we ascend the ladder of importance, the more we get to see the individuals in charge. Compare this to the civilians we see in the Lokapala. They all have unique designs that help you distinguish them from each other. Granted, I could just be looking too deep into things. There's a high chance that the grunts look identical to each other only to save time on 3D modeling. There's no reason to give each grunt a distinct look if all they're going to amount to is enemy fodder. Though I like to think that this uniformed design was done in service of the narrative. On the other side of the discussion, we have Jenna Angel. While she temporarily helps out the Embryon by providing them the means to get to Sarah, it's quickly established that she has ulterior motives. Despite working for the Karma Society, Angel doesn't share their worldview. She believes that if mankind were to live under the order of the Karma Society, they'd be destined to repeat their mistakes. The argument that Angel makes is that the world would be better off if everyone was put on equal footing and let natural selection take its course. The strong will survive and the weak will be weeded out. In that way, it would transform the real world into something similar to the Junkyard. Constant wars would be waged until all life as we know it would cease to exist. Angel plans on killing Cuvier and infecting everyone with the demon virus in order to make this a possibility. Angel's mindset stems from an inner hatred of humanity. To jump ahead a bit, we learn that Angel used to be a researcher tasked with finding a cure to the stone disease. She was aided by a scientist named David, who Angel harbored deep feelings for, though one day, David would eventually contract the disease himself. While he was spending time in the isolation ward, the facility was attacked by terrorists. David would die that night in Angel's arms, and while he wished for her not to hate humanity for what happened, she couldn't help but spiral into anger. She would end up creating and perfecting the demon virus so she could have the power to take down Cuvier when she least expects it. This is all pretty standard stuff for the SMT series. However, what makes DDS2 interesting is that this discussion isn't at the forefront of the narrative like it is for most games. It more so exists as a backdrop to the real story that's being told here. In a way, that can be seen as a bit disappointing. There's a lot of mystery and intrigue surrounding Angel. She's a key player to the universe of the DDS games. She's Sarah's mother. She created the demon virus, and she plans on overthrowing the Karma Society in order to bring about her desires for a world filled with chaos. However, her overall impact on the narratives told throughout both games is rather minimal when you really think about it. In DDS2 specifically, Angel only shows up a few times throughout the story, and while she's occasionally an obstacle for the Embryon, not much focus is given to her because there are far more pressing matters by the time she does become a problem. At the same time, it can be argued that Angel working in the background helps keep the world feel more grounded and alive. A narrative's world shouldn't revolve exclusively around the main characters, and just because what Angel is doing isn't as important to the Embryon members, that doesn't mean that it's meaningless to the game's universe. The fact that Angel only becomes a threat once you start meddling with her own plans makes the world feel real and constantly moving with or without the aid of the player characters. And if there's one thing that SMT has always been good at, it's that world building. But what about the story surrounding our characters? Does DDS2 deliver a satisfying conclusion to this duology? In my opinion anyway, I think it does. Every character gets their moment to shine, and all feel as though they bring some sort of value to the team. My personal favorites ended up being Gale and Cielo because of their brotherly bond that they share. The two characters contrast each other nicely. Cielo is a very charismatic and laid-back character most of the time, though there are moments where the writers allow him to take the situation seriously. Gale is a reserved, more analytical member of the group. Rarely does he ever crack a smile or break his cold, almost emotionless facade. Not only are these interactions entertaining to watch, but they're surprisingly nuanced. Near the end of the game, God is attempting to destroy the world by sucking all of its data up into the sun. Cielo ends up making a bet with Gale to see who will be the one to convince God to give humanity a second chance. However, Gale ends up staying behind to fight Angel. But before the group leaves, Gale and Cielo share one last moment.
What about our contest?
We'll postpone it.
I'll just give you the win, brother.
Thanks, brother.
I love this cutscene. It demonstrates that the Embryon all share a genuine bond with each other that goes beyond simple camaraderie. This even extends to the relationship between Surf and Heat. While these two characters were at odds with each other throughout both games, we see that these two share a connection. Surf even goes as far as to uphold Heat's dying wish, which makes me think that, despite their differences, there was some form of mutual respect between these two. Roland also has his own character arc, though it isn't as fleshed out as the others. We learn that the Locapala's leader used to be a man named Greg. Not only was he Roland's best friend, but he's also Fred's father. We eventually learn that Roland fled a mission gone awry, which resulted in Greg's death. Roland would then be thrust with the responsibility to not only lead the Locapala, but also act as Fred's guardian. Roland is unsure if he's fit for those responsibilities, and blames his own cowardice for Greg's death. This caused Roland to fall into a deep depression, where he would use alcohol to drown out his guilt and insecurities. But upon meeting the Embryon, Roland decides to make a change in his life. He sobers up and joins the Embryon on the front lines to fight against the Karma Society. Roland is on a personal journey of self-reflection and atonement. He realized he's been wasting his life away and feels as though it's his duty to honor Greg's legacy. Roland's story culminates in his eventual sacrifice. He goes on a suicide mission to blow the power plant sky high in an attempt to destroy the demon Maganata. He spends his last moments reminiscing on his life and telling Fred the truth of what happened to Greg. Roland sacrificing his own life for the sake of a good cause represents him overcoming that cowardice he felt. At the same time, he dies peacefully, knowing that he didn't waste the life that Greg gifted to him. On paper, Roland is very compelling. The issue is that there isn't much done with his character beyond what I just described. We're given the bare essentials, but I think a lot more could have been explored with Roland, both on a personal level and also for the sake of world building. Roland could have worked as a method to give us a better glimpse at the world prior to the discovery of the Cuvier disease. Did Roland have a family? What kind of life did he live? Simply put, the game isn't really interested in showing us that aspect of Roland, which would be fine, but if that's the case, then I think they killed him off far too soon for his death to have any lasting impact. Maybe if there was one more dungeon focused mostly on Roland as a character, then I would feel differently. I know it might not seem fair to compare his character to the other party members, since they had 2 full games of development, but it's hard not to. I don't think that Roland is a bad character, mind you, but I would have liked to have seen more done with him in the main story. The only character left to discuss is Sarah, and by extension, Surf. DDS1 spent a lot of time building up the mystery surrounding the identity of Sarah and what exactly her true purpose is, and it isn't until the halfway point of the second game when that truth is finally revealed. After barely surviving his second encounter with Heat, Surf is approached by the black cat we've been seeing throughout both titles. This cat reveals itself to be a higher entity named Schrodinger, and wishes to guide Surf down the path of enlightenment. In order to do so, Schrodinger reveals to Surf his true identity, Sarah's origins, and the reason why the world is in the state that it is. 5 years ago, the Karma Society was looking for ways to communicate with God. They would experiment on children who had a strong connection to God in order to accomplish this. However, the process required for this would take an immense toll on the test subjects both physically and mentally. Sarah was one of those children used for these experiments, and the one leading the project was a man named Surf Sheffield, a scientist that wasn't running this experiment for the pursuit of knowledge, rather, he was looking for a way to harness God's power for his own gain. While Sheffield acts as a sweet and caring friend towards Sarah, in reality, he had very little regard for human life. He viewed his fellow man as nothing more than machines to be used to achieve his goals, and would emotionally manipulate Sarah into communicating with God, even though it caused her great pain. In order to help deal with the mental stress, Sarah would end up creating a virtual paradise, along with AI recreations of people from the real world that are based on her perception of them. Of course, there's Surf, his assistant Argula, another cyber shaman named Cielo, and finally there's Heat, a scientist who may seem aggressive and intimidating on the outside, but in actuality cares deeply for Sarah and is disgusted by the experiments being conducted. During one of the experiments, Heat becomes fed up with seeing Sarah in such pain and confronts Surf. During their argument, Heat is shot and killed, but unbeknownst to Surf, Sarah had witnessed the entire event. Sarah was filled with so much despair and sadness that God's data became corrupted, turning the sun black and infecting Surf with the demon virus, which led to his eventual death. Upon learning this truth, Surf is forced to confront the shadows of his past, those being the real Surf and the ideal one that existed in Sarah's mind. However, by doing so, our Surf is able to come to the realization that despite the fragments of his past life, he's grown and changed into his own individual, all thanks to the experiences he went through with his comrades. I will admit, this is a lot to take in at once, but I actually think that this is a very solid twist. Not only does this explain the origins of all the characters, but it recontextualizes previous events in the story. For example, during one of the dungeons in the first DDS game, we're told of a story of 2 princes competing for the affection of a princess. Obviously, the princess is supposed to represent Sarah, but you're meant to assume that the good prince is Surf and the evil prince is Heat. However, we never get to hear the end of that story and are instead only treated to static ramblings. This is because it's a memory that Sarah desperately wanted to lock away. Seeing the man that she trusted was nothing more than a fabrication shattered her worldview. She spent the next 5 years sealing her heart away, wanting to forget the trauma she went through. But this didn't stop the Karma Society from transforming her paradise into the hell we know as the Junkyard. However, this leads us to the entire point of the DDS series, that being the never-ending cycle of reincarnation and the path to enlightenment. The digital Devil Saga games take heavy influence from Hindu mythology. This ranges from the names of locations, the demonic forms the characters transform into, and most important to this discussion, the idea of reincarnation. The term Atma in Hinduism means inner self or spirit that's separate from your personality. It's best to think of it as a soul. Whenever a body dies, the spirit will return to God, where it will then be reincarnated. While the soul will remain the same, the body and personality will be different. This cycle is known as samsara and is repeated for all eternity. In Digital Devil Saga, the term data is used as a stand-in for spirit. Everything is comprised of data. After someone dies, their data will return to God, where it's then recycled in the process of reincarnation. This explains the visions Gale was seeing of Angel throughout both games. He's the reincarnation of the scientist David, and while Gale's personality is completely different from David's, part of his spirit still resides within Gale. In Hinduism, the ultimate goal is to achieve self-liberation from samsara. This means that your spirit will break away from the cycle of reincarnation, and you'll achieve enlightenment. The final act of the game sees God enacting divine punishment on mankind for their sins. He begins to siphon all data from the world, and if he isn't stopped, then everything will be erased by sunrise. The remaining members of the Embryon send their souls to the sun in order to convince God to forgive humanity. Though during the process, Sarah and Serph's spirits merge and they're reborn as a higher entity named Seraph. When Seraph arrives on the surface of the sun, they're greeted by the spirits of their companions. What's cool is that choices made throughout both games will influence aspects of the final dungeon, such as whether Heat or Roland will accompany you for the final battle. It's a nice detail, but it doesn't have any impact on the story. The climax of the journey sees Seraph beg God to give humanity another chance. While there are always going to be bad people in the world, most are trying to change themselves for the better, and Seraph is willing to take full responsibility for their actions. Before God makes his decision, he puts humanity's will to the test and challenges Seraph to one final battle. After the fight, God is fully convinced of mankind's potential to change its course and decides to spare the world. While the other members of the Embryon begin the process of reincarnation, Seraph on the other hand is granted with the gift of knowledge from God. Through this enlightenment, not only have they escaped the cycle of samsara, but they've gained an understanding of humanity's failings. It's at this point where Schrödinger reappears, congratulating Seraph on achieving enlightenment. Schrödinger reveals their true form to be a Seraph from an alternate universe. With that, the two embark on a journey to observe the many different realities, in hopes that more will be able to achieve enlightenment. Many years have passed since the Dark Ages, and we see an adult Fred acting as a guardian for the next generation. Now that the sun has returned to normal, life back on Earth begins anew, and humanity works to move towards a much brighter future. The ending of Digital Devil Saga 2 is one of the most contentious in the franchise. I often see players left in confusion during the final act, and when I first played the game, I felt the same way. However, as time goes on, I find that the ending has really started to grow on me. Something that I appreciate about DDS2 is that it has faith and respect for the audience. Not every aspect of the story is spoon-fed to the player, and there's enough room left open for personal interpretation. But this comes at the cost of the narrative not being very accessible for a lot of people. If you know nothing about Hinduism and aren't interested in doing your own research about it, then I can see how you'd get lost. It's not like the other entries in the franchise, where the narratives are pretty cut and dry. They can be enjoyed even if you don't know much about the mythology surrounding them. The same can't be said about DDS2, since Hinduism plays a very large part in the narrative and universe of the game. And since the Digital Devil Saga games were created to cater to a wider audience than mainline SMT, the fact that the narrative ironically ends up being less approachable can be seen as a bit of a failure. However, if I were to look past that and give my own opinion on the story of DDS2, then I actually really enjoyed it. As a whole, Digital Devil Saga 2 is one of my favorite entries in the entire Megami Tensei franchise. It took everything that I liked about the first game and improved upon it, while also cutting off the unnecessary fat. The mantra grid is a much better system than what was there previously. Grinding has been cut down significantly because of the changes made to the mantra tree and the new skills that were implemented. The Karma Ring system adds a new layer of customization that hasn't been attempted in the series since, and even though the game is a bit on the easy side because of it, the overall combat experience is a hell of a lot more fun. Dungeons, on the other hand, are about the same quality as the first game. They're nothing bad, but at the same time, they just sort of exist. The later dungeons have interesting gimmicks, but they aren't used to their fullest potential, and the final dungeon goes on for far too long. While the game is a bit lacking in the dungeon design, it more than makes up for it in the quality of its story. The game does a great job at delivering a satisfying conclusion to the cast of characters, and providing us with a lot to think about on a thematic level. I know it sounds like I'm dunking on the first game a lot, but that's mostly because I think almost everything done there was accomplished better here. here. I still like the first digital Devil Saga game, but it's not something that I find myself wanting to replay often. In contrast, DDS2 fully realizes the potential set by the first game, and is a title that I look back on with a lot of fondness, both on a gameplay and narrative front. To this day, I find it strange that there are so many people that love the first game, but never end up giving DDS2 a shot, which is a shame because I can't help but feel as though those people are missing out on a quality JRPG. I consider Digital Devil Saga 2 to be a heavily underrated game in the community, and I hope that this video has helped convince at least some of you to check it out, because man, this game is really something special. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I'd like to give a special shout out to all of my channel supporters whose names are on screen now. It's because of these lovely people that I'm able to make videos at the pace I do currently. These videos take a while to make, so if you're at all interested in helping out and donating, you can do so through my Patreon or channel memberships. I have a few things I can offer in return, such as early video access, a special Discord role, and even some behind the scenes content on occasion. Somewhat recently, I decided to set a new Patreon goal in hopes of potentially hiring a video editor. This will help speed up video production significantly, and will allow me to work on much larger projects without having to worry about a content drought. Every donation helps, and if the rewards I mentioned sound interesting to you, then you can find out more by following the links in the description. Well, I finally did it. I made the DDS2 video, a whole year after the first one. I seriously didn't intend it for me to take this long to get to this game, because I genuinely love it. I was just preoccupied with other games I wanted to talk about. Speaking of which, the next time we return to SMT, it'll either be on Strange Journey or Soul Hackers. I'm not entirely sure which one I want to talk about first, but expect a video on one of those games within the next few months. But in terms of my next video, it's currently a toss-up between Kingdom Hearts 2 or another Devil May Cry video, since the one I made on the first game did surprisingly well. Let me know which one you'd rather see first in the comments below. If you want to stay up to date with upcoming videos, then I encourage you to follow my Twitter and join my Discord server. Both will be linked in the description. Once again, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.